And so the topic for today is disaster recovery 101. And the panelists I have today with me are Jeff Coley. Jeff is Director for Systems Engineering and Architecture, Australia, New Zealand in Veritas. I also have distinguished engineer Philip Pereira. Phil is the subject matter expert of data protection and availability solutions. So Phil is here for us to help. And I am going to present today for the topic, which is Disaster Recovery 101. So let's dive in. So when I look at this picture, the first thing that comes to my mind is resilience. Now, the noun resilience clearly indicates that it is an ability of something to overcome difficulties. It's the ability to make sure that you are able to jump back, strike back from difficulties. Now, resilience is always going together in today's world when we talk about disaster recovery. Now, I would actually want to start with the subtle difference between what resilience means and how resilience differs from disaster recovery and how these two come together to formulate a solution for you. So before we look at the difference from a Veritas point of view, what we look at availability as is an ability to get your business keep running no matter what is the underlying risk that it is going through, and we want to deliver optimal performance irrespective of how your uh, scenario or situation with the underlying infrastructure changes. So effectively, disaster recovery is an ability to handle such a risk or an impact into your environment by using an alternative location. Now, this is where some people call it as the secondary site. It is also called as the DR site, and there are different terms. But effectively, disaster recovery is a clear indication that it's something which does not work well on the primary site. Will have a production site down scenario, and an alternative site kicks in. Now, operational recovery on that front means that we are actually being able to process on the primary location. So that's where the difference starts coming in, where I have my disaster recovery coming in when my production system goes down, but the operational recovery focuses on applications. This is where my applications now become my primary focus of the operations. And then beyond that, I'm actually now going to build resiliency and redundancy. Now, because I'm now talking about applications rather than the infrastructure, the key here is to keep your application running in the production site. Irrespective of what happens in the production site, if there is a disaster or a risk, the idea here is to build in that resiliency, build in that redundancy, which is more proactive than actually invoking disaster recovery. So effectively, we now are spanning the whole scenario a few steps backwards and trying to look at the bigger picture rather than just addressing how I handle disaster. So resiliency is basically trying to be proactive. It gives you confidence of getting more uptime rather than recovery times. So, what we're going to talk during this session today is predominantly talking about how we marry resiliency and redundancy with disaster recovery and how the puzzle pieces of puzzles come together to give you the confidence. Now, some keywords that I'm going to keep using every now and then are recovery point objective, which is RPO. So RPO is pretty much defined as the amount of data loss that an application can sustain when it is undergoing a migration or a recovery. So effectively, it's always RPO is always in minutes or it's in time, and it'll always give you how much behind can an application be when it is recovered on the other side. While RTO is actually coming up from an operational point of view, is in terms of it's again a metric of minutes or hours or a metric of time, which gives us the ability to make the service up and running and available. So RPO is the amount of data loss that an application can withstand, and RTO is the time taken for the application to come up on the DR side. Now that's where, the RPO and RTOs always go hand in hand, that how much time am I allowed to go behind and what is my time to recover. And then we also have service level or recovery level objectives where we always tie in the end-to-end metrics. So with that basics in place, now let's look at, what drives our business and what is the key asset that we need to build our protection against. More importantly, if you look at it, every business runs on a few business critical or mission critical applications. The success of this application is pretty much what defines if the business is going to make their dollars or not. So, these can fall in a range of application types. It could be a tier 2 or a tier 3 database. It could be a tier 1 application, which is TIPCO or any other application. It could also be a multi-tiered application. But the idea here is this particular application, which is actually serving the customers or the clients of a particular business, is termed as mission critical application. Now, the most important part of this mission critical application is the data that it creates. Now, the fact being that if the data is at risk, that's when the businesses start going down. Now, that's where we need to build enough resiliency, as we just discussed, enough resiliency in the mission critical applications. And beyond resiliency, we also need to make sure that in case something does go wrong, we have a predictable and a repeatable pattern for us to recover. Now, when it comes to mission critical applications, what are the challenges that we as leaders in this space have seen is pretty much coming in 4 or 5 segments, right? The most important and the most common one that we've heard is application versus infrastructure availability. Now, over a period of time, what we have seen is applications have now started migrating from their physical frames into virtualization. From virtualization, they have now migrated into containers, and these containers are now running on-prem or on cloud. Now, all of the essence still remains around the mission critical applications. If the application is not being monitored, is when the application predictability or the health cannot be ascertained. Now, what infrastructure availability always provides is an ability to maintain the virtualization or container infrastructure status or health. However, application monitoring still is needed to identify application level failures. That's one of the biggest challenge and conundrum in today's world. Secondly, with multiple layers coming in now, with cloud coming in or even virtualization coming in, the application's interaction with the underlying hardware has multiple layers of abstraction built in. Can we deliver the same level of performance as we migrate from one environment to the other? Now, that is again a big challenge when it comes to the performance of a mission critical application. With cloud migrations, of course, we are now looking at a completely different infrastructure. Now, how do I ensure that the same infrastructure can hold the same performance levels as well as the data integrity levels as we have seen in the primary case? And more importantly, with more tools coming in, with different management consoles coming in, and with all of this put together, my RPOs don't change. If my mission critical application goes down, it's going to create as much damage to me or an organization as it would have in the past. So all of these challenges are actually causing the mission critical application lifecycle to change a little bit. Now, as we go forward, it's important for us to identify that every application has its own business value. Now, this application business value can be defined by everyone in a different way. So there is no standard way of building your application value in a template. It's pretty much specific to every business. Now, it's important to start with find what the application value is. In this example, we have actually looked at tier 1 to tier 3, where tier 1 being the mission critical applications, tier 2, tier 3 being dependencies of the mission critical applications, but they are not mission critical for the business. Now, in this case, you don't really want to have a blanket cover or a blanket protection scenario. That's the point where you want to strike a balance between your investment that you make in any solution for data protection or application availability and also make sure that you have enough resiliency built in to deliver the right level of SLAs across your tiers. So generally what comes through is always a application tier metrics. Now in this graph, what you see is on the left-hand side, we see the RPOs in the time scale, and on the right-hand side, I see the RTO in the time scale. So if I have an application which can sustain a few hours or days of data loss, and its application recovery time or RTO is probably spanning in hours to days, I wouldn't want to invest too much, because the more lesser that you go for RPO and RTO, the cost increases. That's how the solution sets are laid out. So if I have an application which actually needs near zero RPO and RTO, I'm going to invest something which is sitting right at the top of the tier, and I'm going to call it as gold. But then that doesn't mean that my tier 2 and tier 3 need the same level of SLA. So as I go down further into the tier, I will have a tier 2 application. Now, this is where I don't want to have near zero RPO or seconds in RTOs. I'm I'm okay to have 15 minutes of RPO. Now, this is where you can actually change the technology that provides your resiliency. Now, tier 1 applications could mean that I have an active-active solution. I have a synchronous replication solution. Tier 2 may be an asynchronous replication solution, which gives you, 15 minutes of RPO and hours of RTO. But an asynchronous replication is not going to be as big as a cost as an active-active. And the third tier could be the bronze tier, where my RPO is 24 hours and RTO is about hours to days. Now this is where I'm okay to take a daily backup or a nightly backup for my system and ensure that I have data ready for me if it comes to in hours or days, and I can still sustain a 24-hour data loss. Now this is how we would actually tier applications based on their RPO, RTOs, and then gain the best out of the dollars. Now, what Veritas offers is an ability to perform all of this through the product suites. So we have our solutions that gives you a way of tuning all of these SLAs in a single product suite. Now let's look at, even if I have my production environments configured in the tiers, I have all my DR plans going through, it still also needs protection. And, as the saying goes, and Mike Tyson called it really clearly, that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Now, once you have it in the mouth is when your recovery plans end up failing. Now, when we did our survey, we identified the top 3 reasons why recoveries fail. Despite of all the prerequisites put in place, there are few reasons why DR fails as well. The topmost reason was lack of testing. No matter what you bring in, it's important for us to keep testing it and have a level of confidence on the entire DR scenario. The second one was configuration drifts. Now, this is where you need to be really careful that somebody who owns the DR is not the one who owns the application. So the application admin makes a change by adding some additional storage to the application that is not being reflected in your DR strategy. And that's where a configuration drift has occurred. So configuration drift has a significant amount of failures that we can associate to. And the third one, again, not surprising now that we're talking about multiple disparate environments. We have cloud where we have virtual networks. On-prem is probably going to be a vSwitch or a distributed vSwitch on VMware. So mapping these networks have always ended up being a problem. So these are the top 3 reasons why why DR has failed for most of the customers. And with Veritas Solutions, is an ability to have predictable disaster recovery solutions with rehearsals. Now, rehearsals are as good as your fire drills that we run in our buildings or in our corporate environments. Now, this is very similar where we actually run non-production impacting testing, and these are automated tests that you can schedule. And these tests keep running every weekend so that you have your confidence that your DR strategy is not impacted. We also have proactive risks and alerts, which actually give you alerts around configuration drifts. So if somebody actually violates a DR policy or a strategy, we have the configuration drift identified clearly. And finally, we have our flexible automation engine, which gives us the ability to uh, build customizations at the network and the DNS layer. So that's pretty much where it comes together and helps us drive that confidence on those failures. So in a nutshell, Veritas InfoScale actually gives you the level of confidence that you need for your mission critical tier one applications, where we can provide you a spectrum of RPOs with near zero to even hours or minutes. And it can provide you the abstraction of environment, no matter if you're running on cloud or no matter if you're running on prem or even if it is hybrid. InfoScale allows you to build a fabric which ensures that the entire application ecosystem is flexible enough to handle underlying faults. That's pretty much what I had for today. And let me see if there are any questions on the chat window. All right, no questions on the chat window yet. I might just get started with any other questions that we received from our session yesterday. All right, again, feel free to type in your questions. Feel free to type in your questions related to the topic that we just discussed, as well as any other topics that come through your mind. Okay, I am now going to start the questions. And again, as I said, we have Jeff and Phil today to help us. Jeff, Phil, can we just do a quick audio check if we are audible?
Can you hear the dog barking, the children screaming, everyone?
Yes, I can.
Hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. I can hear you, Phil, as well. Cool, thank you. All right, let's get into the question and answers. And I will start with the first question that has come in. And this is, what are the resiliency constructs in the world of cloud? That's a brilliant question. And considering that we didn't have enough time for the session, I didn't really cover those slides. But again, with cloud adoption, it's not a trivial start. And Jeff and Phil, feel free to jump in as I go. But cloud, migration to cloud has always been something where organizations consider moving to the cloud as their best option. Now, there are a couple of factors of how you can migrate into cloud. The most simplest way of migrating into cloud is take the virtual machine, migrate or translate that virtual machine as is into an Amazon or an Azure instance, and everything, the ecosystem, the operating system, and the application runs as is. So effectively, we are actually doing a IaaS version of your on-prem virtual machine. The other factor or the other way of doing it is refactoring the application, where we get into cloud native services, microservices, and get the application run as cloud native application. Now, if I look at the first model where applications are being migrated as virtual machines in the cloud, it's important for us to consider the application ecosystem. When I say ecosystem, it is important for us to know if the application needs any underlying databases or if it needs Active Directory. Now, that's where we have to build in the resiliency for Active Directory as well as the application. Secondly, we also need to look at the application ecosystem in the infrastructure. So does it need storage? Does it need shared storage? Does it need network bandwidth? All of those need to be factored in. And finally, it also needs to have the same level of performance. Is the cloud giving you the same IOPS as you got on-prem? Is cloud going to be as seamless when it comes to data transfer in and out of the cloud? So these are the considerations that you start with. Now, what Veritas InfoScale offers you is an ability to stitch a fabric across on-prem workloads and cloud, so that we can deliver with our storage technology as well as availability technology a level of performance as well as application availability and monitoring on cloud. Now, we can of course get into the details of this, and feel free to send us an email on our DL, and we'd be happy to deep dive on that. Jeff, Phil, anything to add on that?
I think Amit, you laid that up very well. I think you've answered most of it. The only thing I could really say is when we start to talk about resiliency in terms of its requirements, most organisations today have to really consider a few key ingredients. So one, in my experience, organisations tend to have some degree of automation within an IT service. It could be a layer, a component of an IT service, but it's typically task-based automation. Organisations seldom have a complete way to run book or to use workflow-based orchestration to effectively control the state of things. So when I'm saying controlling the state, I'm not just talking about, let's say, a three-tier application, a database, a cluster, some middleware, front-end apps, network settings, DNS, all of that stuff got to come together in, I'll just put it out there, in 2020. A lot of organisations still struggle to be able to have a whole IT service-based view in terms of visibility of how a service performs. So think of it again as, global visibility at the IT service layer. Think of it around performance and capacity and trends and demand. Think of it around being able to map dependencies in an orchestration framework or workflow. And then being able to alert and correlate all of that together. Now, if we don't have a view of being able to orchestrate and run book, if we can't or don't have an IT service that's visible end to end, then we can't see and measure risk, which means it makes it very, very hard then to orchestrate what I would say a DR event. I would go further and say that DR in today's world is becoming less and less of a theme. I would say that availability and the ability to orchestrate the movement of a service, not just a VM as an example, is becoming something that's quite pervasive for a tier one, in some cases a tier two application profile or IT service profile. So I just wanted to, wrap that around what Amit said. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Go for it, Phil.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, and now, most, applications today are not in one machine, right? And they are like spread across multiple technologies. Like databases are consolidated on AIX, for example. And so I'm working with a customer whose databases are all on T-Series AIX boxes, but the middleware tends to be on Linux, and then the front end layer sometimes tends to be Windows IIS, and sometimes some of the front end components are integration points to a web front end that is running in the cloud. And so how do you group all these things together for resiliency in the place that, if I have, let's say, the AI system going down because of some reason or the other, I can take care of that, but then how do I map it back into the middleware and front end and whatnot? What do you suggest?
Correct. So you're right that it's important to build that end-to-end orchestration and visibility across different tiers. So that's where the whole DR strategy and planning has to come through.
Yeah, inclusive of all the ancillary services, like what Phil said. It could be, I'll just drop some technology, right? It could be Citrix load balancers. It could be DNS off Cisco infrastructure. It could be IBM or Oracle middleware. It could be Oracle or different types of databases, MySQL, Windows front-end web servers, or Apache. How do you run book that? Right? And how do you really bring in the people, the processes, and the technology elements around that? I think that's key. Some organisations do it very, very well. We've got the notion of what Veritas calls virtual business services. So Amit threw out there what we call a fabric or an availability fabric. It's using the right workflow frameworks to address how an application is controlled in terms of state. It maps its dependencies, and then of course we've got all the ability with these virtual business services to map all of those different dependencies. Now this is something that Veritas has done in various guises. We've made it a lot more modern in terms of look and feel nowadays, but it's something that we do at various levels of the stack. We can pull it all together, big picture, to orchestrate an end-to-end tier one application. And, I just think it's an amazing capability. But, organisations do have to start to think about, how they run book, how they map dependencies, how they reduce reliance on people like me, a former Unix admin with sticky fingers, right? This is what virtual business services and this orchestration framework does.
Thanks, Jeff. And just reading a question that has popped up on the chat window about starting the instances in a sequence. And yes, the virtual business service is actually intended to get the start and stop ordering in the sequence as we want. So if it's a multi-tiered application, the tiers will define the start and stop ordering, and all of that can be automated as part of the migrate or a recovery workflow. So the answer is yes.
All right, thanks.
Cool. All right, I will go to the next question, and Phil, I might get you to help me answer this one. How does ransomware recovery tie into this story?
Right. Yeah, good question you asked, because this morning I opened up the paper and the story was about an organization that is important to us in this day and age of working from home and getting things delivered to home being attacked for the second time by ransomware. Ransomware has become, maybe 1 year ago, we were talking about ransomware like the way we are doing it today. Attacks are happening in lots of cases. I mean, it's in a way almost really shameful that cyber criminals are criminals. They are after exploiting a really vulnerable time for all of us. Now, going back to ransomware, so if you look at it, the best defense against ransomware is to have a recovery plan, of course, right? So you need to have a disaster recovery plan, and the disaster recovery plan, of course, would rely on if there's anything that has been, locked, encrypted. You need to have a good backup strategy to come out of it. So have a good backup, practice the good things with backup, as in have 3 copies, at least 2 copies of backups to recover on-prem, and a 3rd copy off-site should something, happen to the entire location, and something, a copy that you can air-gap. Have a good detection policy. So a detection policy will be, you use the good security tools and the security tools that can not only detect things when they come in, that can also detect that things that are in dormant and waiting to get active. And I mean, within our company's portfolio, there are lots of tools, like what Amit mentioned initially. We have tools that can look at data patterns and identify certain ransomware types. right? So that's an ability that our tools can help with. Some other simple things you can do today, if you are having a backup product being used, even if it is not one from Veritas, is go look at your reporting capabilities of the backup products, right? So look at anomalies out of the norm. Is there a backup that is looking bigger than normal? Is there a backup that, if you're doing incremental backups on a daily basis, and, incremental backups are supposed to complete very fast, and all of a sudden you notice that one of the servers' incremental backup is taking way longer than it normally does, a good indication that maybe an encryption event has started on that server. So just basic, visibility into reporting can help you as well. So look at reporting abilities of your backup products. And of course, a good recovery mechanism, right? So yes, you can have backups. You can have backups offsite. You can air gap the backup. But think of, how you could get the data back faster. A lot of backup recovery tools today have modern recovery mechanisms, right? Including those from, Veritas, mechanisms for doing instant recovery, doing fast recovery, mounting databases directly from backup, and opening them, extracting contents from a database without even performing restore are abilities that backup products have today. So explore those capabilities, practice on how they can help you. And of course, the other really nice chart that I liked Amit put up today was about the RTO, RPO, and the cost metric problem. Ideally, you might want to have everything at RPO 0, all replicated and available to come back quickly. But financially, that is very difficult to implement. So you might end up with a multi-level recovery mechanism. You might have some things on storage replicated with snapshots that you can roll back to, and some data items you might have to get back from a backup copy. So look at orchestration tools that you can help you with. Now, for example, in Veritas, we have NetBackup as a backup product, and we have Veritas Resiliency Platform as a recovery orchestration tool. Now, the two can work together. So recovery with our resiliency platform, you can orchestrate recovery from a snapshot or recovery from a backup, all from a single tool. And tools are something that you need to really get ready when you have to face a ransomware incident, because the last thing you want to do is running around, recovering one server at a time. When you're working on one server, there'll be 10 others lining up to have their servers recovered. So tools can help you automate recovery tasks. So I would say, Amit, those are possibly a few steps to keep in mind in this day and age of ransomware, impacting our businesses.
Yes, thanks, Phil. And I have just flashed the other view of what we just discussed, right? From a multi-tier environment or a multi-tier application perspective, it's not just one application that we need to be worried about. It's about the entire infrastructure and the ecosystem that the application needs. So it's basically the big picture that all needs to be orchestrated and put together. Now, to your point, Phil, in this case, if the web tier is all right to sustain a few hours of RPO, then that's where a backup target could probably be its best solution. And it also helps against ransomware, because that's probably the front end of where all the incoming data would be. Of course, having a backup policy across the tiers will also make it much more resilient, so that you have level 1 and level 2 protections built in. But Jeff, did you want to talk anything further on the VBS aspect that we've just spoken about as well?
Yeah, just briefly, I think a couple of things. You can obviously look at different architectures to support different types of orchestration use cases. So you could be wholly and solely running an application in a single location. You could be having a, if we just go right down a minute in the stack, you could have a different endpoint on an active-passive cluster, or you could have a file system stretched across distance, right? Now that cluster could be, depending on latency requirements, it could be in the cloud. So you could run one end of an application, active-passive more likely, in Azure, or the other end in AWS and cluster across. Not many organizations support that. We do, right? We do it on things like SAP. As an example, you could run in one end of a data center and the other end of the cloud. If you stick this in, if we can bring that slide back up, if you look at some of the different ancillary components here, right? You've got noted on this slide, you might have a public-facing website, you may have Active Directory, you may have SAP, Oracle, Red Hat, Solaris, Windows, different types of user interfaces, network load balancers. Fundamentally, we've got the capability to run book across this. Right? If you want to, as Philip said, bring in how you recover from backup and use an orchestration tool to do that, again, it's the same concept. It all ties in. Some of this calls, native APIs within, say, Oracle, within, say, Cisco infrastructure, as an example. What this all comes down to, though, is to be able to take a BCP type framework from, I'll be glib here, a guy called Ricky and Risk, right? Turn the other side of it over, so two sides of the same coin. You've got a DR strategy then, and you're going to automate it, right? And you're going to do it in such a way that it's pervasive to your business for Tier 1 applications, or maybe Tier 2s. And then you have different ways and means of recovery and recovery point, recovery time objectives for Tier 3 applications. 20 years ago, I worked for an organisation that tried to do this with batch processing tools and schedulers and believe it or not, Perl and shell scripts. And they did a pretty good job. And I haven't actually seen many organisations until recently really start to ramp up on this. But if you get your service management layer right, if you can actually measure the SLAs across all the physical stuff, all the logical stuff, we even start to bring in things like software-defined networking into the equation. What a story. And, again, it can be right-sized to suit your organisation. It doesn't have to be just for applications that must be up and must have a, downtime of, seconds to minutes. It's horses for courses. We've got the right consulting people here, the right pre-sales support and technical excellence in terms of architecture to really help you discuss this. It is complicated, but, can really deliver some awesome business value.
Thanks, Tim. Cool. I'll make a move on to the next question. Maybe, Jeff, I'll have you help out again. How can a data center level DR strategy be put together? Now, so we are again looking at a big picture view here.
Okay, so I'll try and not cover stuff that I thought I might. My view on that is simply go back to the resiliency requirements, automation, orchestration, visibility, risk, and having a capability to run book things. It's all about the right people, the right processes, the right tools, and the right ability to abstract all that complexity. And if we can abstract that complexity, then really we can start to reduce, I would say, the requirements for human intervention. So you would look at defining your application or your IT service value, and then you need to deploy and have a plan for some of those ingredients. So two sides of that same coin again. Ricky and Risk writes a BCP plan. It sits in someone's drawer. It sits on a share somewhere. It gets forgotten about, and occasionally we do some testing. I've seen organisations who move IT services around regularly, right? Banking applications running in, say, Sydney, moving to Melbourne, from Melbourne back to Sydney, different parts of the world, as other examples. And I think it's about, I hope I'm answering the question here, Amit, I think it's about making sure that from an IT service design perspective, we have that strategy where runbook automation, service-based orchestration is built in. It has a principle of reducing the requirement for human intervention, and we can measure that SLA, right? A lot of organisations have adopted private cloud, hyper-converged type environments. We've got portals, we've got, different ways of orchestrating network segmentation. We're starting to talk more about software-defined networking in data centres and even at WAN endpoints. How do you measure availability across that? It's really, really tough, right? It's the ability to correlate within your IT service management stack, because it's not just the one IT service that's got all this logical and physical stuff in it. It's the ability to meter and report. So if you can't correlate how it sticks together, both from the application level down to the infrastructure in many cases probably being the hardest part, then it's really, really hard to say that you could guarantee 5 nines availability to a business, 3 nines availability to a business, that you could move a service in a certain amount of time. Everything's got much more complicated as we've gone on to, really platforms, cloud's a platform, we're integrating different types of tools, applications, systems, services. We're putting them all together. They're all tightly coupled. And if we can't measure it, then, realistically, it's very, very hard to measure business performance. Look, Veritas has a strong, legacy in all of this. We have a strong story today for cloud and the data center. It's very, very hard in a short space of time, like a session like today, to go into depth. But, we could talk about how you measure that. We can talk about how you move and define a strategy around everything end-to-end that we've discussed.
Cool. All right. That sounds like a good roundup summary of the Veritas solutions as well. So thanks, Jeff, for that. The next question I have is getting a little into the details. Why is infrastructure virtualization level availability not enough? I'm guessing this goes in the lines of virtual machine availability and virtual machine vMotion or of that sorts. But predominantly we have applications is what we need to be worried about. Now, what infrastructure level availability provides is an ability to get virtual machines made highly available. But if something really goes bad with the application in terms of performance, in terms of application services not running, it's important for us to also have that level of visibility. And when that application comes in, application also has a clear dependency map called out, and that's where virtual business services can help and have that level of tiering that can come in or above the infrastructure availability. So that's the next one. I didn't want to get too much in that. Of course, we can build a level of automation once applications start being monitored. We can then build a level of automation across the deck and have a lot of steps put in our workflow builder. Now, the workflow builder is our automation tool or an automation engine that you can customize your workflows in and then build in those automated steps for migration and recovery. All right. The next question I have, and I think we've discussed this in different shapes and forms. What are the different techniques used for DR and how DR works? So I believe by now we've had this question answered in multiple manners. The next question I had was, what do you recommend to manage BYOD? Now, if I interpret this question correctly, it is actually coming in from the lines of client-side protection. And that's where, when BYOD comes in, it could be a laptop, it could be a mobile device, or it could have also been, anything that is brought in by the employee. Now, multiple ways of looking at it. We have, backup systems and system recovery tools that help you build certain level of protection and resiliency on top of your BYOD. But most importantly, it is necessary to have that standardization in place. It has to adhere to a policy, which is a company-wide policy. And that policy can then define if the system needs to be backed up, it needs to have certain level of security software installed, as well as it has to have a reporting mechanism of its status back into the central repository. So that's pretty much how you can handle BYOD. Phil, Jeff, did you have any additional comments on that?
I do. I hope you can hear me. Less so around probably something that Veritas provides, and I'm sure there's plenty of technologists on the call who understand this, that you can use network services and other tools as well that effectively baseline a BYOD device when it connects to the network. And in the circumstance that it doesn't fit a certain profile or posture, it black holes it into another VLAN, effectively availing access to updates and software improvements. So probably not a one-size-fits-all approach. We can certainly help with endpoint recovery, something we've done for a long time. But I think it's having the right mix of tools and a bit of a strategy there.
Great. Cool. Thanks for that. All right. So there is a question on net backup on the chat. It says we still are running 773 with library Stanberg P40 plus. Can we upgrade to 8.x with the same libraries? So maybe what I'll do is I'll leave this question open for a minute and see if we have an upfront answer. Otherwise, we'll just have a follow-up for this question after this session. And then there are a couple of comments on the chat as well, where Jim says, from my experience, the biggest problem I've seen in a real DR is IT management. They have a tendency to panic because they're not involved in the DR planning and testing. They should be involved. Absolutely correct. That's absolutely valid point, where getting a DR strategy in place and having a DR plan should have everyone involved, because that's where you're going to understand the right scope and how far and wide do you want to scope a recovery plan, and have a right level of orchestration built in to understand what is the sequence. So, fabulous comment. Thank you for that. And on to the point that it has to be a wider process, not just run by the DR admin and a tool set.
DR as a concept, and for apps that can't go down, is becoming far more of a capability that's pervasive and built in. Some organisations have made further progress with that than others, but I can certainly talk to very large organisations that are getting to the point where they're saying, if I need to do DR, I just move a service or avail it somewhere else, and I've got a process and a methodology or some orchestration to do it. I no longer think more around having to have a dedicated DR environment as such. It's a functional capability within my IT service.
Agreed. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Let me see if there are any other questions on the chat. Those were the questions on my registered list. Let's see if there are any additional questions, comments coming. All right, I don't see any other questions on the chat. So if there are any questions, please type in now. I am probably going to wait for another minute to see if there is anything else. But and Phil, Jeff, jump in if you had any other comments or questions. Otherwise, we'll just move on. And as you can see, please feedback and your questions to our email here. We are happy to follow up with a session or an email or a phone call discussion just to help you in the challenge that you're trying to solve for. Any last comments? Yes, Phil.
Amit, I'll add a few There was a question I believe you asked that came in about net backup compatibility on version 8 to a 10.40 tape library. Is that what I heard? Yeah. It's pretty easy for you to find out if you're listening in. Remember a few things. Sort, S-O-R-T .veritas.com is a place you can go to, and from there you can locate the compatibility list for everything that is Veritas, Net Backup, InfoScale, these products we talked about. And navigating through there, you will be able to find a compatibility list of what Net Backup 8 supports. The compatibility list that I'm looking at for Net Backup 8 does show 10.40 in the list as well. So I'll be happy to know. But go and have a look at that and make sure the mode of attachment for the 10 library to your media server is what is available for you to use. So just a comment from me.
Thanks, Phil. That's good. And again, yes, Jeff.
I think as we bring this session to a close, it's a very, very broad and detailed discussion. If anyone's interested in really peeling this back with us, in further detail, reach out. We're more than open to run other sessions, especially we can stand something up remotely to a specific organisation or a group of organisations. I would go as far as saying that we're getting a lot of interest in this space. It's complicated, and we can show you how to cut through it all.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, agreed. Feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to help in whatever manner we can. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I think we've almost reached the top of the hour. We probably get 6-7 minutes back in our calendars. But the session for next week, we are still yet to finalize the date. We haven't really locked in a date for the next session, but you should see that on LinkedIn very, very soon. So thank you all for joining in, and thanks for the questions. Keep them flooding in, and we'll speak soon. Stay home, stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.